Hello, my name is Mark Butler, and I thank you for joining us as we continue in our study in Ecclesiastes. And today we'll be in chapter 11 and chapter 12, because chapter 11 goes into chapter 12 in finishing a paragraph, and it kind of goes together, and they're short and work together. But I just want to remind you that, when we began this journey, I wanted to do this journey because it was something that's read in the temple during this time of year, as you finish up a year and you give thanks to God for harvest and all that He has given to you, and remember all that He's provided and how He's cared for you. And so we it is the story of I entitled it at first, "I Can't Get No Satisfaction," because Solomon set off with the wisdom that God had given him. Remember, God came to him and asked him, because Solomon was real worried as he had come into the kingship over the Jewish people, and he thought, well, I can't do this. I'm not my father. I'm not very old. I can't do this. But God granted him great wisdom when he asked for it, and because he just asked for wisdom to care for the people, God also granted him many riches as well. And he took both of these things and took the opportunity to just try out life and see if he could figure out what the meaning of life was and how to live the best life. And that's what we get here in Ecclesiastes, and it's wrapping up today as we finish, and we'll kind of talk about the things that he discovered as he kind of pulls it all together. And as we begin today, I think about let's read first from chapter 11 here as we begin, and we'll go into chapter 12, and then we'll move on from there. Solomon writes, "Cast your bread upon the surface of the waters, for you will find it after many days. Divide your portion to 7 or 8, or even to 8, for you do not know what misfortune may occur on the earth. If the clouds are full, they pour out rain upon the earth, or whether a tree falls toward the south or toward the north, wherever the tree falls, it lies. He who watches the wind will not sow, and he who looks at the clouds will not reap. Just as you do not know the path of the wind, and how bones are formed in the womb of a pregnant woman, so you do not know the activity of God who makes all things. Sow your seed in the morning, and do not be idle in the evening, for you do not know whether the morning or evening sowing will succeed, or whether both of them alike will be good. The light is pleasant and is good for the eyes to see the sun. Indeed, if a man should live many years, let him rejoice in them all, and let him remember the days of darkness, for they shall be many. Everything that is to come will be futility. Rejoice, young man, during your childhood, and let your heart be pleasant during the days of young manhood, and follow the impulses of your heart, excuse me, and the desires of your eyes. Yet know that God will bring you to judgment for all these things. So remove vexation from your heart, and put away pain from your body, and because childhood and all the prime of life are fleeting. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, to when you will say, I have no delight in them. Before the sun, the light, the moon, the stars are darkened, and the clouds return after the rain. In that day that the watchmen of the house tremble, and mighty men stoop, and grinding ones stand idle, because they are few. And those who look through windows grow dim. And the doors on the street are shut as the sound of the grinding mill is low. And one will rise at the sound of the bird, and all the daughters in song will sing softly. Furthermore, men are afraid of the high place, and of terrors on the road, and the almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper drags himself along, and the cakeberry is ineffective. For man goes to his eternal home, while mourners go about in the street. Remember him before the silver cord is broken, and the golden bowl is crushed, and the pitcher by the well is shattered, and the wheel at the cistern is crushed. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, all is vanity. So as we take a look at this, looking at Ecclesiastes 11 and 12, I entitled this, Fear God and Keep His Commandments. And as we look at this, and we have mention of this in our scripture, we think about when does life begin? And I very much believe it begins at conception. I believe that God already has a plan for us, as He tells us in the prophets, and as He speaks, I knew you before I formed you in your mother's womb. God has a plan for each one of us, and He has called upon us to live this life. And even though in the very beginning of this, Solomon made the point that life is endless cycles that we really can't do anything with, he did discover later on in the book that God breaks into those cycles. And so it makes life possible. Wisdom does help. And there is an opportunity to live a life that will give help to others, and you can find some peace, and you can find some hope in it, and have some enjoyment in life as well. So we're going to talk about those things. He begins in 11 talking about preparing to be old. Preparing to be old. And at the end, he talks about the end of life as he goes through 12. And we read part of that, and I read a lot of it because I believe that section from 12:3 to 12:7 really is a description of the things that we go through as we grow older. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But at first, in chapter 11, he gives some sound financial advice. He says that we've got to diversify. He talks about the fact of casting your bread on the surface of many waters. He had many merchant ships, I'm sure, and sent them out. He didn't just send one ship out with one kind of product on it. He sent a bunch of them out. And he tells us to do that as well. He also in here talks about a farmer who, if he's scared of the clouds and scared of the rain and scared of the bad weather and whatever, and but he takes all those things, including the heat of the day, into account, and he fashions a garden that will grow, and he has to do it. No, he can't just let fear keep him from doing anything. And so he talks about the fact that farmer would grow many crops. He didn't just grow one crop, he'd grow many crops as well. And so in that he says we must diversify. I remember Jeff Foxworthy making fun of us, talking about how Southerners diversify. He said, we put part of it in a box and keep it up under the bed, and then we bury part of it in a jar out in the yard. There's a little fear there of the stock market crashing and the banks from our older generations when they went through the Depression. But this wisdom does come from the Scriptures, from Solomon himself, who I believe probably became the richest that ever lived, and with all the things that he had together. And he tells us to diversify. And he also tells us in this, I believe, that we must take some calculated risks. Life is about risks. We can't live our life not taking any risks. I think I heard a little story about this, about a man who, kind of just looked around, and he saw young lovers and broken hearts, and he decided for himself that he wasn't going to put his heart out there. He didn't want his heart broke. He looked around at some people that did financial business and made money and then lost that money, and he said, well, I'm not going to, put my money in there. I'm just going to hang on to it, and he looked around at others who had friends, and, things came in the way and they lost friendships, so he just didn't bother to have a friend. And then in times later, as time passed, he passed on. As he stood before God, he offered him his life, and God said to him, what life? What life? Because he took no risks. I believe we have to take some risks. And yes, there is disaster that happens. We know that. He's already told us that there's danger in business. There's danger in investing here. There's danger in living. But God has called upon us to trust in Him. When we read not only in the Old Testament that God will take care of us, James, I always think about, in the New Testament tells us there when trials come. It's not if they come, but when they come, we trust in the Lord, and He will help us, and He will bless us as well. When we work, as we see in here, sailing is a hard job, and especially back in those days, they didn't have the Weather Channel to tell us that a hurricane was coming, and it often did, and killed many people. And so we know that there's risks involved. There's risks involved in planting a garden as well. There's storms and things that come at weird or different times that sometimes keep us from producing all that we could produce. But we have to trust in the Lord to be a farmer, and we have to trust in the Lord to live life as well. And God does call us. He calls upon us to live life and to celebrate. And He constantly does that 5-6 times in this book. Tells us to live life, celebrate. Celebrate with your wife, celebrate with your spouse, celebrate with your family. Work hard, but when you have time, then celebrate and rejoice. In this passage, he tells you to rejoice through the days of the darkness. As he speaks of this, and it kind of goes from the end of 11 into the first part of 12 there, as we read to the second verse, to remember God in the days of your youth. And of course, we're to teach this to young people, to remember God. And I think about also Timothy, as Paul explains to him, don't let your youth be an excuse to sin. Live a godly life as a young person and see the blessings that God will give you in your life. But he describes the youth as the light of your life, and in the older years as the darkness of your life. And what it's just saying there is that as many times as young people, we don't have a lot of problems. Now, there are some young people that have some true physical problems. I'm not saying that. But the general overall statement of what he's saying here is that you're in your best health as a youth, and you have little problems, but as you age, you find out more and more problems you've got. And so live in those days and worship and praise and prepare yourselves for what is coming. We talked about earlier in this book that the trouble that comes into this world came through us. The sin in our lives is what set this world off axis. We're not the way it was created to be, and we're not the way God created us to be. But there is hope, because God had a plan. He knew it was going to happen, and He had a plan to save us, and that plan is Christ. That's true. But He tells us as we live here to trust in Him. And even in the darkness, and listen to the things he says is, as he begins to describe it in verse 3, in the day that the watchmen of the house tremble. You know, some would say that's our hands. Some would say that's our ability to do things. You know, we're real steady as a young person, but we begin to tremble as we grow older. And in the day that the watchmen of the house tremble and mighty men stoop, we stand erect when we're younger, and we begin to stoop as we grow older. What he's speaking of here, and the grinding ones that stand idle, they are few, and those some would believe are our teeth. Sometimes we lose some teeth. Some certainly have problems. I know I've had trouble with that before. Grinding in your sleep, grind your teeth. But he's speaking of that there, and then he goes on to say, those who look through the windows grow dim. And we've talked about, we've all heard somebody talk about eyes being the windows to the soul or to the person, and that's what he's speaking of here. Our eyes growing dim, and so you just kind of see a picture of a person growing older. Things change. This body is not made to last forever, but it is much like the farmer plants the seed. One day our body will be planted, and we will rise resurrected in an eternal body. And so we thank God for that. But while we're here, we prepare ourselves to live as best we can, as he calls us to celebrate life, to live with those who God has blessed us with. And we're seeing here that what we need to do is to take into account of all that we have and all those around us and be thankful. And he goes on into, and I didn't talk about it in here, but some other things, just fading eyesight, being easily startled. You can't hear as well to enjoy music, or you may lose the ability to do some daily activities, or have fear of an injury. I understand that, and certainly worry about those who have to live at home alone. And of course a slower gait as well, just not able to move about as quickly and as good. And we see down here in the last part, in verse 6, remember him before the silver cord is broken and the golden bowl is crushed and the pitcher by the well is shattered and the wheel of the cistern is crushed, and the dust will return to earth. And that's speaking of, some would think that silver cord is the spine of a person. And was it Jack LaLanne that said, your spine is your lifeline? And many times when we have trouble in our body, it originates from somewhere on our spine or from our back, and certainly it is very important. And that's what many would think this silver cord is talking about. And then the broken and golden, the golden bowl and the crushed and the pitcher was the digestion from inside the body as well, just your organs inside your body. And certainly we have trouble with that. Many have to take medicine for their heart, and I know many have trouble with stomach as well. And certainly that is just the thing that we have to live with. And then it goes on to say, then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, all is vanity. And you'll remember what we talked about. He said all those things that he accomplished, and he can't keep them. He'll pass them on, just as his Father passed on everything to him. It was like trying to grab the wind as it went by. And that's what he speaks of in Vanity of Vanities, and as he calls himself the preacher who is speaking. And everything that, from the gardens, from the houses, from the riches, from everything that he's done all these things, and he was able to accomplish them, but he can't keep them. what we get that old saying, you can't take it with you. And he goes on to kind of end it here but he does speak of the fact that then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God. There is an afterlife. There is hope. There is hope through Christ. He didn't understand it as we do because he didn't get to hear of Jesus and his teachings, and he just heard the precursor of it from Moses. But we can be sure to know that there is an afterlife, and but while we're here, we can live through God's wisdom. And truly, what Solomon is telling us here is life is empty without God. Without God, it's empty. And let me read this last part to you as we finish. Starting at verse 9 through 14, it says, in addition to being a wise man, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, and he pondered, searched out, and arranged many proverbs. The preacher sought to find delightful words and to write words of truth correctly. The words of the wise man are like goads. The masters of these collections are like well-driven nails. They are given by one shepherd. But beyond this, my son, be warned. The writing of many books is endless, and the excessive devotion to books is wearying to the body. And what he's talking about here is that he has took this effort on. And what he has really produced out of it is the writings. The writings of Ecclesiastes, of Proverbs, of Song of Solomon that he wrote, the wisdom that he wrote down for us to live by. He has determined that does help life and gives us opportunity to live a life that is fulfilling. Even though it is time, it is short in time. But we can live a fulfilling life, and we can go on to, and he doesn't understand it exactly as we do. But we realize that Christ will return and we will resurrect from the grave, and we'll have a life with no more troubles, no more hurts, no more problems. And so he says he wrote these proverbs down so we can live like that and realize that they are worth something. But he also gives us a warning. Be careful about reading the books of men. There's a tremendous amount of heresy out there, that's for sure. What we need to do is we need to know the Bible. And when we know the Bible, and if something contradicts the Bible, then we don't need to read it, because it's heresy. It's not true. Now, there are those who write books about the Bible that are good, and there are those who write books about the Bible that I believe have gotten it wrong. And so we have to be careful. And this needs to be the number one book that you read, the Bible itself, and allowing it to speak to you. And when we live by Him, we can certainly be blessed. And he writes to the end here in verse 13, the conclusion when all has been heard is to fear God and keep His commandments. Because this applies to every person. For God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. So this is the thing that He knows at the end is we will stand before God and give an account. Now, how He understood this exactly, we don't know, but God certainly revealed it to him. And God has also revealed it to him that He is a God of miracles. He knows that somehow we're going to stand before God, and He's going to make everything, He's going to make judgment on everything. And I know we live this life many, many times. We think, somebody or some group has gotten away with something. I don't believe that to be true. I believe nothing escapes the eyes of God, and God will set everything straight in that day when He judges all. And the wonderful thing is that He's given us a miracle as Christ has come, as His Son, Jesus, has come, and He's come to live the perfect life, showed us how to live that perfect life, and using these words of wisdom that Solomon has written to us, and so that we can be a blessing not only to God but to ourselves and to each other, and we can give thanks that we have this opportunity to live as a blessing to others. And so this should lead us to be thankful for all that God has given us. That's what he said. Spend time with your family and friends and loved ones and worship. Be thankful, rejoice. And so as we begin next week, we'll be in the Psalms. I hope you'll join us as we'll continue to praise the Lord and give thanks to him. Prepare our hearts for Thanksgiving. It's not just one day a year. It should be every day that we give thanks to God. It can dry up our soul when we sit around and think about all the things we think we might need. But the Lord has given us so much, and we give thanks to him. Thank you for joining me today as we continue and finish up Ecclesiastes. And I hope that you will see each one on our YouTube channel, and it will speak to you. May you be blessed.